One day in the sprawling city of Austin, Texas, a young man named Jake found himself at a crossroads. Wasn't a physical crossroads of streets and avenues, but a crossroads of the mind, a place he found himself in far more often than he cared to admit. At 22 years old, Jake was a prisoner in a cell with invisible walls. A cell built not of stone and iron, but of his own untamed thoughts. His days were a blur of half-finished tasks and unrealized potential. He would wake up with grand ambitions, his mind buzzing with visions of writing a screenplay, learning to code, or finally starting that fitness journey. He could see the finished product so vividly. The crisp dialogue of his script, the complex app he'd design, the toned physique he'd admire in the mirror. But between the vision and the reality lay a treacherous swamp of mental chatter. This morning, for instance, he had planned to finally start the first scene of his screenplay. He sat at his worn wooden desk, a fresh cup of Starbucks coffee steaming beside him, the cursor blinking patiently on a blank white screen. For a full 5 minutes, he stared. Then the first thought crept in, a tiny whisper. You should probably check your emails first. Get the admin out of the way. He clicked over. Nothing important, but a notification from ESPN popped up, and he clicked on that. Then a funny TikTok video a friend had sent him last night. Then another recommended video. An hour later, the coffee was cold, the cursor still blinked, and Jake felt a familiar heavy weight of guilt settle on his chest. This was his life. Constant war within. He was a leaf tossed on a turbulent river of thoughts, yanked this way and that by every current of distraction, fear, and self-doubt. He had the desire, the intelligence, and the dreams. What he lacked was the one thing no one had ever taught him, the ability to discipline his thoughts. One evening, after a particularly unproductive day where he'd spent 6 hours researching the best productivity hacks on Reddit instead of actually doing any work, Jake decided to go for a walk. He needed to escape the 4 walls that seemed to close in on him, the silent witnesses to his failure. He wandered without direction, H's feet carrying him away from the bustling South Congress Avenue into the older, quieter part of town near the river. The buildings here were made of dark, age-stained brick, and vintage street lamps flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the sidewalks. He found himself standing before a peculiar shop he had never noticed before. Its sign, a simple wooden plank, read The Mind Forge. Intrigued by the name, he peered through the dusty window. Inside, it wasn't a shop in the traditional sense. There were no shelves of products. Instead, the walls were lined with shelves, holding thousands of small, clear glass vials, each one glowing with a faint inner light. Some vials held a chaotic, stormy gray smoke that swirled violently. Others held a steady, warm, golden light. A few were dark and stagnant. In the center of the room, a man sat at a simple workbench, holding a vial over a small, focused flame. The man looked up, as if he'd felt Jake's gaze, and smiled. He had kind, deep-set eyes that held a century of wisdom. Curiosity overriding his usual hesitation, Jake pushed open the heavy oak door. A small bell chimed. "Welcome," the man said, his voice a low rumble, like smooth stones tumbling in a gentle river. "I'm Sam. It's not often I get visitors. Most people are too caught up in their own storms to notice this place." Jake looked around, awestruck. "What is this place?" "This," Sam said, gesturing to the walls of glowing vials, "is a mind forge, a place where thoughts are refined." He picked up a vial containing a beautiful, radiant golden light, a thought well-disciplined, focused, and true. He then pointed to a vial of churning gray, a thought left untamed, chaotic, and fearful. All thoughts have a form, a weight, a consequence. Most people carry thousands of them in their heads, never realizing they have the power to forge them. Jake's eyes widened. It was a metaphor for his very life. "Can you teach me?" He blurted out. "I'm drowning in them." "Yeah, I have all these dreams, but I can never seem to grab hold of them." Sam studied him for a long moment, his gaze piercing yet compassionate. "The first step is not to grab," he said softly. "The first step is to listen. Sit." He gestured to a stool opposite his workbench. Jake sat, feeling a strange sense of calm in this cluttered, magical space. Sam took a small, empty vial from a drawer. He held it up to the lamp. "Close your eyes," Sam instructed. "Just listen. Tell me what you hear." Jake obeyed. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the familiar cacophony began. "This is stupid. You're wasting time. You should be home, trying to work. That guy probably thinks you're an idiot. Remember that embarrassing thing you said in high school? You're not good enough to write a screenplay? And what if you fail? What's for dinner? You should really check your phone. That blinking cursor is still waiting for you. It's a mess, Jake whispered, his brow furrowed. It's like 1,000 people all shouting at once. Open your eyes, Sam said. The vial in his hand was now filled with a turbulent, ugly gray smoke. He held it up so Jake could see. These are your thoughts. See them as separate from you, a chaotic environment you're trapped in. But the first lesson of discipline is to realize you are not your thoughts. You are the one who hears the thoughts. You are the sky, not the storm. He placed the vial on the table. The storm rages, but the sky remains. God holds the storm, but it is not damaged by it. To discipline your thoughts, you must first become aware of them, not as commands, but as mere suggestions, as clouds passing through your sky. Jake stared at the gray vial, then at the serene face of the old man. It was a radical idea. For his whole life, he had believed the thoughts were him. If a thought told him he was lazy, he believed he was lazy. If a thought told him a task was too hard, he believed it was impossible. He had never once considered just observing the thought. When he left the Mind Forge that night, Old Man gave him the small empty vial. To remind you, you are the container. Fill it wisely. The next few weeks were a battle. Jake practiced being the watcher constantly. While walking down South Congress, he'd observe the thoughts about the people he passed. While eating breakfast at a diner, he'd observe the thoughts of judgment or craving. While trying to work on his screenplay, he'd watch the army of distraction thoughts march in. It was like he'd turned on a light in a messy room, and now he could finally see the clutter. It was overwhelming, but also liberating. He began to realize how much of his mental energy was wasted on automatic, unhelpful patterns. He returned to the Mind Forge a month later. Old Man seemed pleased to see him. You've been practicing, he stated. I can see it in your eyes. The storm is still there, but you are no longer lost in it. You are on the hill. I feel like I'm going crazy, Jake admitted with a rueful smile. I see how insane my mind is, Sam chuckled. That is the first sign of sanity. Now, you are ready for the next lesson. You have learned to observe the raw ore. Now, we learn to refine it. To choose which thoughts to feed and which to let starve, he picked up a piece of dark, misshapen, or this is a thought you have been hammering for years. I am not disciplined. You have taken this raw, fleeting thought and, by believing it, by acting as if it were true, you have forged it into a solid, heavy chain that binds you. Old Man taught Jake a technique called thought replacement. Whenever he caught himself hammering a disempowering thought, this is too hard, I'll never finish. I'm a fraud. He was to pause, take a breath, and consciously choose a different constructive thought to put on the anvil. Not a fantastical, positive thinking lie, but a simple, actionable truth. Instead of this is too hard, he would forge. I'll just focus on the next 5 minutes. Instead of I'm a fraud, he would forge. I am learning, and that is enough for now. Jake left the forge that day feeling empowered. But he soon discovered that this second step was even harder than the first. Choosing a new thought felt clunky, unnatural, like trying to write with your non-dominant hand. There were days of spectacular failure. He'd binge-watch an entire season of some Netflix show instead of working, then spend hours hammering himself with thoughts of guilt and failure. But he kept returning to the forge. He kept practicing. One afternoon, during a difficult writing session at a coffee shop, the familiar thought arose. You have no idea what you're doing. This is terrible. Give up. He felt the old pull, the familiar urge to flee to the comforting numbing of his phone. But this time, he paused. He became the watcher. There's the give-up thought. He acknowledged it. And then, he consciously chose a different ore. His third visit to the Mind Forge was months later. He walked in with a different posture. His shoulders were straighter, his gaze clearer. Old Man noticed immediately. You've been busy at the anvil, Old Man said, a warm smile spreading across his face. I have, Jake admitted. It's still a fight every single day. But the fight feels different. I'm not just surviving. I'm learning to fight back. Old Man nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. That is the essence of it. Discipline is not the absence of the wild horse. It is the daily, patient work of holding the reins. It is the choice, moment by moment, to guide your powerful steed in the direction you wish to go. Old Man then showed Jake a new part of the forge. At the very back was a small, empty room with a single cushion on the floor. The walls were covered in a material that seemed to absorb all sound, creating a profound and utter silence. The final step, Old Man whispered, is to learn to enjoy the stillness. You have learned to watch the thoughts. You have learned to choose which ones to forge. Now you must learn to create space between them, to sit in the gap, the silence, the pure awareness that is your true self. Jake began to incorporate this into his life. He started with just 5 minutes a day, sitting in silence on his apartment balcony, overlooking the Austin skyline, not trying to do anything, just being the sky. At first, it was torture. His mind screamed for stimulation, but gradually, the gaps grew longer, and in those gaps, he found a peace he had never known. Years later, Jake was no longer a prisoner of his mind. He was its master and its student. He had written his screenplay and even sold it to a small production company. He had built a successful career as a writer and life coach, helping others who were drowning in their own mental storms. He still had chaotic thoughts. The storm still came, but now he knew it was just weather. He knew how to find his hill, how to hold the reins, and how to find peace in the quiet gaps between the thunder.